Welcome back into the Pick and Roll NBA podcast with Jet and Sap, presented by Full Press Coverage. Check out fullpresscoverage.com for all sorts of great sports content, including this podcast. Lots of other great podcasts. There's, awesome playoff hockey going on right now. We got play-in basketball, soon to be playoff basketball, NFL offseason. Some people are intrigued by baseball, I guess, still. So you can check out content for all those sports and more on Full Press Coverage. You can find our podcast, the Pick and Roll NBA podcast with Jet and Sap, wherever podcasts are in fact found. Sap, I got a nice birthday present last night. The Celtics treated me to a relatively easy victory. They won 118 to 100. It wasn't easy the entire way, but the second half, once Jayson Tatum decided that, hey, I'm the best player on the court, it became sort of a moot point, and the Celtics looked like they were moving on.
They were down 8 with 2 minutes left in the second quarter. They cut it to 2 at the half, and you just at that point felt, okay, we're going to have a game here. First half was really weird. It looked like the Celtics were controlled, and it looked like Washington was in control, and then went to halftime and said, we're probably going to have a close second half, and we didn't, because Jayson Tatum was amazing. He scored 23 points in the third quarter, 32 of his 50 in the second half. He got to the line 17 times in the game and hit all 17 free throws, which I know we've talked about this a million times, Jet. He's nearly unstoppable going to the basket because, again, he's 6'9", 6'10". He's long, he's strong. He can use either hand. If need be, he can kind of pull up and take a 6 or 8 foot pull-up pop shot. He's got all the tools in the toolbox, right? I mean, he can score in a wide range of ways. He's kind of I'll call him a poor man's Kevin Durant, which is a very high compliment.
That's what they were saying on TNT after the game. That's what they were calling him, Sap.
If we could understand what, Marv Albert and Grant Hill were saying, they were whispering throughout the game as if they were at the 18th hole at the Masters. I don't know what was
he's
going
almost
on
done
there.
with his long career, Sap. So, give the guy a little bit of a break.
I love Marv Albert. And look, he's 80 years old, and they're doing games from their living room with a giant TV screen. So if he's confusing Aaron Nesmith and Romeo Langford, then you know what? He's not the only one, because neither one of those guys is really impact players. But I think that with Tatum, he was really aggressive last night, and he was the best player in the court because Bradley Beal's dealing with a hamstring. And I don't know what got into or wasn't into Russell Westbrook last night. He had 1 rebound, no assists in the second half. This is a guy who's been averaging a triple-double for 4 of the last 5 years. He didn't seem to be as engaged as he normally is. Was there something wrong? Was there some sort of beef in the locker room before the game or at halftime? Did he have food poisoning? It just didn't seem to be himself, right? I mean, because he usually plays balls to the wall, but if you examine Russell Westbrook over the years, he's had a lot of stinkers in the playoffs. And I'm treating this as a playoff type game. I mean, it's not technically a playoff game, but it's a play-in game. And so Jayson Tatum was the best player on the floor. And you know what? Kemba Walker was probably the second best player on the floor. They combined for 82 points. I mean, if that happens regularly, they'll be tough to beat. Just you don't expect someone to average 50 a game in the postseason and then Kemba Walker to add in 32. That's not likely to happen very often when they take on the Brooklyn Nets starting on Saturday night. But no, nice win for the Celtics. They get to play the Brooklyn Nets. Expectations are not high at all. I mean, I think if they take 1 game off the Nets, that's somewhat of an accomplishment. My biggest fear in this, though, Jet, is if they ever take the Nets to 6 games, that Wick Grossbeck, Danny Ainge, and Brad Stevens are going to sit down and say, you know what? Just think what could have happened if we had Jaylen Brown, who's now out for the year with that wrist injury. And if we didn't get decimated by COVID throughout the year, let's run it back next year. I mean, the best thing if you're a Celtics fan is get swept, embarrassed by Brooklyn, and maybe that wakes up ownership.
Yeah, I mean, that's part of why I said this the other day, Sap. I'm never going to root against them. But the best thing for the team was probably to not make the playoffs based off of, getting in the lottery, because they're not going anywhere this year. And it would have really forced ownership to make some big decisions, hard decisions that they really need to make. Yeah, the worst thing they can do is get some sort of false sense of security or sense of accomplishment and say, you know what, maybe let's just run it back next year, because I think anybody that's even watched a couple games of them this year can pretty easily tell it's a very flawed roster and a flawed team that isn't going to get to that next level by natural growth. You need to make some changes, whether it's roster, coach, general manager. You need to make some major changes so the DNA of the team is altered, because there's not going to be enough natural progression. I still believe Jayson Tatum can get better. I still believe Jaylen Brown can improve as a player, but as they can improve significantly, and I still don't think it's enough to be an actual championship contender, and that always needs to be the goal. So yeah, I'm with you, Sap, in terms of that. Like if they somehow manage to go 6 with them, you're going to absolutely hear it from the media for sure. From a lot of fans will suddenly be like, well, if we had Jaylen Brown, maybe we'd really have something here. They need to really take a long, hard look at the roster. And we've talked about this before, maybe get rid of Marcus Smart. You got to bring in a lot more veterans on the bench. You certainly need to, at bare minimum, improve the bench, because it was dreadful for almost the entire season. And I mean, last night they played a very short rotation too. Everybody ended up playing because it ended up being a blowout at the end. But Peyton Pritchard only played, I think, 4 minutes in that game, which surprised me. They did not go deep into their bench at all.
No, they didn't. And again, you had Marcus Smart got hobbled, but was able to get back on the court. And of course, Robert Williams III looks like he aggravated that turf toe that he's been dealing with. You just go back a couple of years, Jet. 3 years ago, the Toronto Raptors won nearly 60 games, got swept by Cleveland in the second round, and Masai Ujiri fired his coach, who was coach of the year, and made a huge trade, trading a very popular player, DeMar DeRozan, for Kawhi Leonard. He knew he was probably only going to have for 1 year, and then the Raptors won the championship. He went all in for that 1 year, and it paid off. And that was a team that had a much better regular season than the Celtics just had, and I don't think the Celtics are going to beat Brooklyn and get to the second round of the playoffs. So if Ainge and Grossbeck and Brad Stevens just run this thing back next year because they won 1 or 2 games off the Brooklyn Nets, then shame on them.
Yeah, I mean, listen, I think it's pretty clear at this point, Sap, that you do have a legitimate star player on your hands now, Jayson
You
Tatum.
do.
He's had 3 50-plus games since April. I mean, that's elite level scoring. No one can argue that. He's 23 years old. He should just continue to improve over the next couple of seasons. And I think we saw leaps this year with his passing ability, and his rebounding were better too. His defense is it's not great, but it's certainly not bad. So he has room to continue to improve, even though he is already, I'd say, one of the best handful of scorers in the NBA currently. So that's a good foundational piece. And Jaylen Brown, you and I both like, and maybe he can be, a good foundational piece too. But I think that you still need that, either alpha dog or a guy that's a little bit better than Tatum, or that is as good as Tatum, but has, more experience than him. Because it's not Kemba Walker. We've seen that. He was great last night, but it's failed. The Kemba Walker experiment overall is not something that's going to lead you to a championship. So I think you can feel really positive about where you're at with Jayson Tatum. Say, okay, we got this guy here. He could end up being a top 10 player in the NBA. I do believe that. Maybe he's not going to be a top 5 player in the NBA, but that's pretty rarefied air. Now let's try to look at the rest of the roster and say, we need to make sure it is giving him the best chance to win, and we're complementing the pieces we already have. And the roster right now, Sap, and we've talked about this almost the entire season, it's a lot of Jags. It's a lot of guys who have one skill or no skills. And so regardless of what they do against Brooklyn, and I fully expect for them to be swept, and I think that's the expectation of most people, outside of, probably Brian Scalabrine thinks they're going to win in 5 games. They need to build the roster with that in mind, saying, we have this piece. How do we help Jayson Tatum? How do we help Jaylen Brown? And go from there.
The thing is, by the time that Tatum and Brown reach their ceiling, then Kemba Walker is going to be playing elsewhere, or maybe retired at that point. So it's not going to work together. So now you have to move on from that option. And I think you less than me, but I think that Marcus Smart may be the trade chip in this offseason. But what exactly do you get in return for a guy who has 1 year left on his contract, albeit a pretty good contract to try to trade? The drafting has been mediocre at best. I mean, Danny Ainge nailed it on Jayson Tatum and Jaylen Brown. I thought it was a good draft choice. Marcus Smart, I would have preferred Julius Randle, but I'm not going to go back to the 2014 draft and relitigate that. But really, since then, there's been a lot of meh, middling type players. Robert Williams III is interesting because his ceiling's high, but he can never stay healthy. So you got to look at the roster composition and also realize that the East is strong, stronger than it's been in the past because the trio in Brooklyn are still all in their prime. Durant, Harden, and Kyrie Irving. Philadelphia's got two studs, right? And Embiid and Simmons, and a pretty darn good third guy in Tobias Harris. Milwaukee's got Giannis and Drew Holiday, and maybe they can make a final deal to put them over the top. And Miami's not going anywhere. So the East is deeper than it's been in the past. I mean, you were able to get to the conference finals 3 out of the last 4 years because I don't think the conference was as deep as it is now. But once you put Kyrie Irving, Kevin Durant, and James Harden on the same team, now you have a clear-cut favorite. I mean, the Celtics can do a great job with building a roster, and it still may not be good enough to beat that Brooklyn team.
Yeah, that's true because it is, and it's a rare. And we did this earlier in the season. Is it the greatest
Mm-hmm.
accumulation of individual talents on one team? So we're not just talking about a good team. We're talking about
No.
a team that has an all-time roster potentially.
Mm-hmm.
I still have them, and Vegas has them right now as the finals favorite, as the favorite to win it all. So yeah, they could certainly do a good job building roster, and it might not be enough, but this isn't a good job building a roster,
No.
what they have right now. So you can't let Danny Ainge off the hook and just say, oh, well, Brooklyn, they got this unbelievable team. Let's just pass the buck. That was the narrative for a while, Sap, with, oh, we'll just wait till LeBron James leaves the Eastern Conference or retires and we'll just figure it out. Well, he didn't go anywhere for a long time and they sort of just Celtics plodded along and were, bridgy teams that were fun, but not nowhere near competing for a championship. And it's been some time since they were legitimately competing for a title. So that should always be the goal in mind and the expectation. And this roster is nowhere near good enough. And the young guys that you have on it outside of Brown and Tatum don't look like they're good enough to be pieces on a roster that's competing for a championship. I'll give Neesmith a pass because he had, this is a weird rookie year with COVID. He played just 10 games last year at Vanderbilt. He's come on a little bit stronger. So maybe he is. I've seen, I think, almost enough of Romeo Langford to know that he has almost no chance of contributing offensively.
Mm-hmm.
He just has no skill there. So maybe he's, the 9th, 10th, 11th guy in a rotation that you can play situationally for defense, which is basically what Semi Ojeleye has been for the past 3 or 4 years. So, maybe you have another Semi Ojeleye on your hands, which is not great with a lottery pick. Grant Williams, you know what I think about him. I named him my least valuable player of the NBA. So I don't think he's going to morph into somebody that's, going to be helping this roster. I like Peyton Pritchard. Obviously, last night they saw something where they didn't want to play him. So I don't know what they think about for his future in the NBA. So there's a lot of guys on the team, even young guys, Sap, that it seems like almost this entire roster is expendable. It really does.
Yeah, and what do you get in return for these players? Because they are the type of player that another team can draft mid to late in the first round, or maybe even in the second round. So it's a talent drain that we've seen on the Boston Celtics for the last 2 years. Look, 2 years ago when they lost to Milwaukee in 5 games in the second round of the playoffs, Marcus Morris was their eighth best player. Marcus Morris right now is probably the fourth best player on the Clippers, and the Clippers are the second choice to win the Western Conference behind only the Lakers. So that's the type of talent that team had. It didn't fit together, but they were loaded talent-wise. And yes, Jayson Tatum and Jaylen Brown were a couple of years younger, so they weren't quite all-stars or all-NBA type players. They are now. But yeah, Danny Ainge, I think, has done a horrible job building or dismantling this roster, and it's left it where you have Jayson Tatum, Jaylen Brown, who's now out till next season, Kemba Walker, who can't play back-to-back nights, and there's times he gets absolutely destroyed on defense when the opposition decides to go at him, and then a bunch of other guys. So that's where you're at, but it'll be interesting to see what happens here. There'll be some good stories with them playing Brooklyn because I'm sure Kyrie Irving will give us some stuff to talk about. Lord knows what's going to come out of his mouth. And Kevin Durant will find some fight somewhere that really doesn't exist. And James Harden has actually become the most consistent and most mature of the three players. And I think the most valuable player on that team because they win 4 out of every 5 games that James Harden plays in. Other than that, they're kind of a 500 team. So if Harden's healthy and playing well, they're going to be very difficult to beat.
Yeah, uh, I agree. There's a reason I picked them to win the championship and roll through the Eastern Conference as I think they're going to do. Um, yeah, certainly a talent drain with the Celtics, and that's what happens when you have an all-star player, an all-NBA player like Kyrie Irving leave for nothing, and then you have Gordon Hayward, who made one all-star game, but it's a very good player, certainly
Mhm.
well above average, and he leaves for nothing. So that's sort of what you would expect if you're just losing players and you're getting nothing in return. And it's frustrating. The narrative from the Boston media now has been, and now at the end of the season is, well, Brad Stevens didn't have, a lot to work with this year. The roster's just not very good. And, they COVID and this, that, and the other thing. Well, what was the excuse, like you said, Sap, 2 years ago when they had an
Mhm.
excellent roster and he wasn't able to elevate the team? What was the problem there? I think that roster wise, that was certainly a good enough team to reach the finals, uh, based off of the accumulation of just sheer talent on the team. And this year, all I've heard is how great Grant Williams is, and the young players are really coming along. But now, at the end of the season, now that the realization is that they're a 500 team and going to probably be swept in the first round, suddenly the mass media saying, well, they don't have a lot of talent. Let's let Brad Stevens off the hook here. It's just whatever narrative helps promote Danny Ainge or Brad Stevens is the narrative that's going to be gone with by the Boston media.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of excuses. This was a 500 team this year, and they were able to come up with a good effort against Washington to secure the 7 seed. Washington played probably the worst game they've played in the last 2 months. Russell Westbrook, who has averaged a triple double 4 out of the last 5 years, over the final third of the season, averaged 23, nearly 12 rebounds and 12 assists per game. I think he showed us why I don't put him up there with the all-time greats, because the thing about Russell Westbrook, he competes, he busts his ass. I don't think he knows how to win. Like, he doesn't know how to put those final pieces together. And I don't have a clue what the hell was going on with him in the second half. I mean, when you ever see Russell Westbrook get 1 rebound and no assists in a half of basketball and go 3 for 9 from the floor, which is about average for him because he, quite frankly, can't shoot, but normally finds a way to score. He had 6 points, 1 rebound, 0 assists in the second half when the game was there. They're up 2 going in to halftime. I don't know, he didn't even seem to have the same fire that he normally has. Was there something wrong with him? Maybe the long season's caught up to him. They've still got an opportunity now because they'll play Indiana tomorrow. The winner of that will be the 8 seed. Will play
I mean, they
Philadelphia.
should
Maybe
beat they should
they
beat
should beat
Indiana.
Indiana. Yeah, the game's going to be in Washington. Hopefully for Washington, Beal's a little bit healthier and Westbrook's more engaged. And the reward for being the 8 seed is you play Philadelphia. I mean, maybe they didn't want to be the 7 seed. Maybe they said, you know what? We'd rather be the 8 seed because we'll play Philadelphia. Maybe we can beat them, or at least have a better chance against them than you would against Brooklyn. If that's the mechanism of the play-in tournament, then we're all screwed. If teams are tanking the play-in tournament to be the 8 seed rather than the 7 seed, oh my lord, then we're all in trouble. And I don't think Washington's good enough to say, you know what, let the Celtics be the 7 seed. We'll take care of Indiana 2 nights from now, because they're not that good to call that type of shot. They're not the Lakers or the Nets who can say, okay, one game will take care of business.
Yeah, I agree with you. I have a hard time believing that's what they did. I think they just, didn't play a good game. And
No.
like you said early in the show, Sap, they did take a lead early, and it
Yeah.
started being like, oh, okay, here come the Celtics white flags. But Jason Tatum, I think, just was not allow them to lose last night. He was
No.
saying, nope, this is just not going to happen. The most impressive number, I think, in the game that was indicative of why the Celtics won is he was 17 for 17 at the line,
Oh,
Sap. Not just hitting all of them, the fact that he got to the line 17 times. I mean, that's how you put up 50-point games, is when you get to the free throw line that
absolutely.
many times.
And he really is unguardable. I mean, he's 6'10". That's what we were told, that he grew 2 inches last offseason. He's long, he's strong. Again, as I said earlier, he can use either hand. He can take it right to the rack. He can also pull up and take, the little 12-foot jumper that, made Kobe Bryant and Michael Jordan unstoppable, right? So you have that type of offensive game. And I'm not saying he's Kobe or Michael, but, has that type of skill set. So he's really tough to hold back. And I like the fact that from the get-go, he was engaged. We see so many times where Jayson Tatum in the first quarter is just kind of feeling the game out a little bit. and then he tries to turn it on in the second quarter. He was aggressive from the get-go, and that was impressive. It got the Celtics into the flow of things, and really they got behind 8 late in the second quarter, but they cut it to 2 before halftime, and from that point forward, he was unstoppable.
Yeah, I think it's the single greatest play-in game performance in NBA history in my mind, Seth.
Absolutely. Yeah, either that or, Donatas Sabonis, who had nearly a triple-double for the Pacers. He looked like Dave Cowens out there last night. What a horrible performance by Charlotte.
Oh yeah, that was not worth
Really,
watching.
you give up 144 points in a play-in game. Like, man, they had
To a
the
not full
bus
strength
on.
Pacers team, by the way. They
Yeah,
didn't have Levert. They didn't have Miles Turner.
no, Charlotte showed up to the arena and said, "You know what? Don't shut the buses off. Leave them running because we'll be out in a couple hours. We may not even have to shower after this game." That was bad.
Yeah, the Pacers had
But
8 guys in double figures.
it was amazing, including Dougie McDermott, who the Celtics could have had, and we know he's, as you detailed in a previous podcast, is maybe the worst defensive player in the league. You know what, though? The guy can hit threes, and that's where the league's headed. And he had a big game last night. But yeah, I think Washington. I'd rather see Washington than Indiana because Westbrook and Beal, they can have those very monstrous games. I kind of wanted to see Washington, Brooklyn, because I wanted to see Westbrook against Durant. I thought that would have been a fun series. But the Celtics, if they win one game off of Brooklyn, that's going to be an accomplishment. But I think Tatum can have a huge series because they don't really have a rim protector, so he should be able to get to the rack pretty easily. The only thing is he going to be spending a lot of energy guarding Kevin Durant on the other end, which is a difficult job to take over.
Yeah, there's no stopping Brooklyn
No.
offensively. No matter what the Celtics try to throw at them, they're not going to be able to even slow them down. Yeah, it's at this point, Sap, Tatum's going to get his against any team he goes against. Really, if he's engaged, he's going to get his. He's too big, too strong, too long, too good of a shooter to not put up points. He's at that level now where he can put up 20 in his sleep if he wants to. And that's how gifted of a scorer he is. He's really just an unbelievable scoring machine. But it's the engagement and the consistency that's been lacking, and he's starting to pick that up a little bit. But he has very little help at this right now.
No, he's got Kemba Walker, and that's about it. He scored 82 of the 118 points. That's 70% of their points are scored by 2 guys. And look, if they're going to go combine for 82 points, they have a chance, but that's not going to generally happen. I think that Tatum may have been motivated a little bit. And I know we're going to discuss it. Chad Finn of the Boston Globe wrote a column, I believe on Monday, saying that Jayson Tatum should have channeled Kevin Garnett instead of Kobe Bryant growing up. And maybe he did it for Kobe last night, because we know the relationship they had. That was his favorite player. And they worked together a couple of summers ago where, Kobe was showing Jayson Tatum's, the ropes. And he's been very vocal about his love of Kobe Bryant. And I thought Chad Finn's column was ridiculous. To be honest with you,
most of his columns are.
Well, especially when he starts talking about basketball, because first of all, he said Kobe's one of the 15 greatest players of all time. No, he's one of the 10 greatest players of all time. Let's not, there's got to be some hatred in there towards Kobe Bryant. He also referenced Kendrick Perkins as a power forward, which I don't recall Kendrick Perkins ever being a power forward in a center. Okay. And then he said that Garnett was the most unselfish superstar in league history. I don't know, the guy that also got inducted into the Hall of Fame last weekend, Tim Duncan, I think is even more unselfish than Kevin Garnett. And Garnett had some issues with teammates here with Ray Allen, in Minnesota with Stephon Marbury and Wally Zerbiak. I just push back a little bit with all of this, like, ball sucking of Kevin Garnett. He won one championship here, great. And that 2008 Celtics team gets, like, celebrated more than Russell winning 11 titles in the 50s and 60s, and Garnett changed the culture and all of this stuff. Well, how was Kevin Garnett in Game 7 against the Lakers in the 2010 finals?
No,
do you remember?
Past his prime at
Past
that point.
His prime. So. He was 34 years old. I know he had a knee problem. The whole, both teams looked like they were exhausted by Game 7. 83-79 shows you where the league's grown in the last 10 years. He had 3 rebounds in that game. Kobe Bryant had 15 rebounds. The Lakers out rebounded the Celtics by 15 in that game, and that's the biggest reason the Lakers won Game 7. We keep hearing about all this great leadership of Kevin Garnett, and he's banging his head on the stanchion and pounding his chest, and he got 3 rebounds. So it was like, let's calm down with, he should have modeled his game after Kevin Garnett, who won 1 title, and let's not disparage Kobe Bryant, who won 5. So, and look, what kid at 10 years old back in 2008, which is what Jayson Tatum was, do you know of any kid that was emulating Kevin Garnett's game compared to Kobe Bryant? I mean, come on, be serious.
It's probably some kids in Minnesota and some kids here.
Maybe a few, but I mean, at that point, you were emulating Kobe, maybe a little bit of Allen Iverson, maybe not even that much of LeBron. I mean, a lot of young players don't emulate LeBron's game because you really can't. There's not a lot of 6'9", 260-pound guys on planet Earth that have that skill level, but everybody wanted to be Michael Jordan or Kobe Bryant or Allen Iverson and whoever else. And now everybody wants to be Steph Curry. But that column really irritated me. I'm sorry. It was just like the way he dismissed Kobe Bryant, it was just like, he's a top 15 player. No, he's top 10 player at the minimum.
Yeah, like, I'm not gonna disparage Kevin Garnett at all because he's one of my
I did,
not just players of all time. Yeah, like you did. I'm assuming that his overall point was more comparing it to the years where Kobe and the Lakers weren't good because it was like a one-man show and Kobe was taking all the shots and was as opposed to compare the Kobe Bryant that won the 5 titles. Yeah,
I mean, obviously, part of his career, Jed. He won 5 titles. Garnett won 1.
I don't think anybody
in Minnesota. I mean,
I don't think anybody would argue.
Finals.
I don't think anybody would argue that Garnett's a better player than Kobe. I don't know how you could make that argument
unless Chad Finn has Garnett in the top 15, which I don't. I have him like 22nd. I actually have listings, not just top 15. I'll give you where I rank these guys. I got Kobe at 9 and Garnett at 22. But it's just almost like, what was wrong with emulating Kobe's game? And who in their right mind thinks that a 10-year-old's going to emulate anybody but Kobe Bryant or Michael Jordan or Steph Curry now? Those are the guys kids are aligned with.
If the team was currently constructed like that 08 Celtics team, and you could maybe say, okay, Jayson Tatum, give up a little bit to help some other guys. But frankly, he kind of has to be selfish, and I'd want him to be a little bit more selfish because there's just not a lot of other options. It's him, Jaylen Brown, and on a good night, a lucky night, Kemba Walker. So I'd like to see Jayson Tatum actually be a little bit more selfish on some nights.
Like he was last night. Yeah, right. That's great. That's what they needed.
The roster sucks. So, what do you expect him to do? He's going to pass the ball more to Grant Williams? I mean, how's that really help you?
Right.
So, listen,
was Kobe passing to Smush Parker? I mean, I'd rather have Kobe take a left-handed hook than some of the guys he was playing with at that time in the Lakers. I'd rather have Jayson Tatum float a left-handed hook rather than give Grant Williams or one of those stiffs an open jumper. They'll miss it.
Sure. I'd love to have 12 Kevin Garnetts, but that's just not what
too much testosterone. If you had that, I mean, it'd kill someone.
He had my favorite attitude of anybody in the NBA, Sap, because of how I love those intense players and how
fake.
He was not fake, real. Totally
God, oh my God, that was such fake intensity. Banging his head on the stanchion, pounding his chest, and getting 3 rebounds in Game 7 of the 2010 finals.
Well, it's one game.
It was a big game. It's the biggest game he ever played in, right? That is the biggest game that he ever played in and that Kobe Bryant ever played in. Game 7 of the NBA Finals. That was a legacy game, right? The Celtics were going to win 2 out of 3. The Lakers were going for their, at that point, 5th title with Kobe Bryant. That was a huge game. And the Celtics had a lead throughout, and they just fell apart down the stretch. And some of the secondary pieces for the Lakers hit big shots. And Kobe was 6 for 24 from the field that night. It's not like he had a pristine night, but he grabbed 15 rebounds and he got to the free throw line, I believe, 15 times. I mean, I just got turned off with, I think that 08 team just irritates me at some point because they won 1 title, which is the same amount that the Mavericks won or the Raptors won. So
because they knocked out LeBron in the playoffs. That's what irritates you about it.
Yeah, they knocked him out in 08 when his best player was Larry Hughes, and in 2010 with Mo Williams.
Cleveland was favored in one of those series, the 2010
In
series.
2010, yeah, not in
Yeah.
2008. 2008, I was amazed Cleveland took the Celtics to 7. That was a weird playoff because Atlanta took the Celtics to 7
Yeah.
and then got blown out in Game 7. And the Cavaliers took the Celtics to Game 7, and that was the mano a mano Paul Pierce and LeBron, which was just a great duel. And then they were able to beat the Pistons in 6 and the Lakers in 6. But I mean, that team won one championship. They probably should have won at least 2. In 2010, it was there for them. 09, I'll cut them slack there because Garnett was out. So
Yeah,
that
out
was
for
a
the
big
playoffs.
thing. But I mean, you had 3 times in that run where they blew 3 games to 2 leads, right? I mean, it did it to Orlando in 2009. It did it to the Lakers in 2010, and they did it to LeBron and Miami in 2012. I mean, Doc Rivers, as much as I like him and is a really good coach, has blown a lot of big leads in the postseason, including last year with the Clippers when they were up 3-1 against Denver. So I just push back, and I love Garnett as a player. I do, and I think he's great on TV and all that stuff. But some of the people around here, they elevate him like above Bill freaking Russell.
Yeah, I think, I think it's a lot more to do with narrative than, actually, skill. And I believe he's one of the greatest players of all time. But, because the team was so bad from the period of time between Larry Bird retiring, basically, and when they won a championship. And remember, the year prior, they were the worst team in the freaking league. So it was sort of like that whole narrative of, restoration of glory and putting them back in, a top of the basketball world. And so, the narrative around it is obviously has taken on another a life of its own. And actually, I'm staring right now at a poster that I have of the 08 finals team that's directly in my eye line. It's not behind me, but it's in front of me. So I, obviously love the team. It's the only Celtics championship team in my lifetime. Sap. So they hold a special place in my heart, and it's the only Celtics championship team in a lot of people's lifetimes who, now cover or are big fans of the team. My generation is are big Celtics fans, millennials. And so we've only seen one team win the title. But I get what you're saying. And I do think Jayson Tatum's game translates more to a Kobe Bryant type of game than a Kevin Garnett. I mean, Garnett's calling card was defense. Kobe Bryant's calling card was offense. Jayson Tatum's calling card is offense. Just that seems logical.
Kobe was damn good defensively too, though.
Overrated defensively, but he was good defensively.
He was really good.
Paul Pierce was every bit as good defensively as Kobe Bryant.
No, he
Kobe
wasn't.
Bryant. Yes,
Come
he was.
on.
Absolutely was.
Stop it.
Sap, absolutely he was. Paul Pierce extremely underrated defensively. Kobe Bryant extremely overrated defensively.
Yeah, but they're not equal defensively. I mean, Kobe made first and second team all defense like 13 times
on name recognition.
Right. I mean, I think LeBron's a better defender than Kobe. I always have to bring LeBron into it. I think Michael's better
bigger,
than
faster,
LeBron
stronger
defensively. Yeah, and because LeBron can cover, point guards to centers. He's got that variance of skill, and Michael was phenomenal defensively. Although Michael didn't even have to be the best defensive player on his team because Scottie Pippen was equally as good as him. And then when they added Rodman, they had like 3 ridiculous defenders. Like
had LeBron chosen to be engaged all the time defensively, he might be the greatest defensive player of all time. But he's taken seasons off defensively.
Well,
seasons off.
There's a lot of load on him. I mean, it's like the argument I always have with old timers when I say Barry Bonds is the greatest player of all time. They're like, why did he play center field? I said, well, because he was busy stealing 500 bases. Like, you want to save the guy a little bit. And he also became the best defensive left fielder ever. Why wasn't he in right field? I said, well, they played him in left field. He had a good, not a great arm. I mean, is this the, are we having a skills contest here? Or are we talking about baseball? So, there's a pushback there. Yeah, I mean, LeBron, you'll see in the postseason, he'll be engaged defensively. He was last year. It was against Denver. Jamal Murray was going off, and LeBron locked him down in some big games in the conference finals. So, those guys, I would agree. Kobe's a little overrated defensively, but I still think he was a better defender than Paul Pierce. But again,
never
a better defender than Paul Pierce. Okay.
All right. Hear it.
And do you think Paul Pierce is better than Dwayne Wade? Because that was the discussion a year ago.
I do think that it's a lot closer than people would make the argument. You hate this 08 Celtics team, Sap. Leave them alone. You know what? You can dump on Ray Allen if you want to.
No, I like Ray Allen. He helped LeBron win a championship.
That's the only person you can dump on.
That's my guy, Ray Allen. He came to Miami and helped LeBron win a championship. God bless him.
God, I was so happy Garnett didn't mention him in his speech. So petty. I love it.
Oh yeah, no, that's what makes the NBA fantastic. All these guys are petty. It's awesome. I mean, other than Tim Duncan again, who apparently Chad Finn maybe forgot that Tim Duncan played in the NBA because he was so unselfish that he thought that Kevin Garnett's the most unselfish player in league history. No, it's Tim Duncan.
Of all the people that circle the wagon in the Celtics media for Danny Ainge and Brad Stevens, Chad Finn might be right at the top of that list.
Oh God, yeah, because he's constantly attacking sports talk radio for dumping on the Celtics. I mean, he's the media columnist. You would think he'd learn that talk radio is to get ratings and say provocative things, not to just go down the middle and say, you know what, the Celtics team, they're fun to watch and they've got a really bright future. No, that's not going to attract
I think
ratings.
he'd rather them get rid of the entire roster and keep Brad Stevens and have him like a football team, picking the coach, which is just insane in basketball to even consider that.
Never going to happen. I mean, right now, the only thing close to that would be Popovich in San Antonio. I mean, they kind of picked Popovich over Kawhi.
Yeah, and that turned out to be the wrong decision.
It's the wrong decision.
They couldn't fire Popovich. It's just they couldn't do it.
No.
But yeah, I mean, in retrospect, obviously, you take the player in the NBA a million times out of a million.
Absolutely. Yeah, especially when we're talking about Kawhi Leonard, who, is a truly great player and has come up huge in the postseason several times. Yeah, you go with the player over the coach any day of the week. I mean, I know there's been some talk too, speaking of player-coach relationship, that in the season finale, the Celtics at the Knicks, that Romeo Langford actually walking back to the bench told Brad Stevens, "Go F yourself." Like, if Romeo Langford is
he's
saying
a Brad
that,
Stevens guy too. Brad Stevens made that pick.
I mean, if that guy's who's like the 11th guy on the team, and maybe I'm being too nice to him, is saying "Go F yourself" to Brad Stevens, I think there's some video stuff. Like, you've lost the team at that point, because at that point, Jayson Tatum could say, "Hey, Brad, would you mind picking up my dry cleaning on your way in?" I mean, the 11th guy is telling the coach "Go F himself." What's the star going to do if he so chooses?
It's like when Robert Horry threw the towel in Danny Ainge's face when he was coaching the Phoenix Suns, right? You're like, oh, well, this is over with. He's lost this team.
No, it's the one sport where, look, and Tom Thibodeau's doing a great job with the Knicks, and he's running that team kind of like old school, but that's only going to last so long.
No, he's burnt out in two prior places.
Yeah, he's a guy after about 3 or 4 years, you just like tune him out.
Yeah, and so listen, we've talked ad nauseum, Sap, about Brad Stevens and how I want his future to go, and you've given your opinions as well, and I think we're in agreement that he's not the right coach for this team if they have championship aspirations in the near future. But it doesn't appear that he's going anywhere. And Adrian Wojnarowski, who's the most plugged in guy in the entire NBA, he says he's not going anywhere. So if he's saying it, it's he's getting it from probably Wyc Grousbeck, realistically.
I would think so. Yeah. Yeah, I don't think Wyc Grousbeck's going to make any changes other than some roster moves that Danny Ainge is going to make. They may tweak things if Danny Ainge becomes the consigliere a la Pat Riley, the way he handles things in Miami. And you bring in a day-to-day general manager, and then you bring in Ainge as a closer. Although I don't know if Ainge is really a good closer. I think Pat Riley's the best closer. Like, if you're a free agent and you get all the groundwork done with the front office of the Miami Heat, and in walks Pat Riley, who looks 15 years younger than he is, tanned, the hair's looking good, he's the godfather, and he starts flashing all these championship rings, that can kind of seal the deal. Danny Ainge, doesn't have the charisma or the cachet of Pat Riley, that's for sure.
Well, I was just, to wrap up this Brad Stevens conversation, I saw Adam Kaufman, who works for, I think he does some stuff for the Sports Hub. He does some stuff on NBC Boston, does some stuff for the Celtics. He was responding to this Woj story about Brad Stevens saying, and he said, "It's crazy this is even a topic. Brad Stevens is going nowhere," in all caps. 6 years left on his contract. And I responded, well, then shame on the Celtics for one, giving him that massive contract extension for really no reason. And two, if they don't believe he's the best coach for the future of the team, then just buy out the contract. That's just, and they're being cheap otherwise.
Jet, if he signed a 6-year extension at say $6 million a year, that's $36 million. So say there's $30 million left on it. Whatever, I'm close with the numbers. This is a franchise that's worth $3.5 billion. They can write off $30 million. And I know the last 2 years have been difficult on teams because of the pandemic. You don't have fans in the stands. Although as of May 29th, if the Celtics can elongate this series to that point, you may have a full house at TD Garden going to next year. Things should be back somewhat to normal. But if ownership can't write off $30 million to change coaches, then what are they doing? I mean, you're just going to die with the guy?
Right, then they're cheap.
Then they're cheap, right? Yeah. I mean, then they,
which they've pushed back against so much, and you can't be a cheap owner in Boston because I mean
no.
you get killed. You get killed for it. I mean, every time it looks like the Red Sox have been cheap, even though they have the most expensive payroll in baseball almost every year. Them and the Yankees, they get destroyed. Robert Kraft has been taking a beating for being cheap for 20 years, even though
Right.
I mean they've given out, they just pay their own players. They didn't typically, this is the first offseason they've paid outside players for the most part.
Well, they had Tom Brady to cover up all the sins.
That's true.
Really, that's what it is. I mean, I still maintain that.
But this is if the Celtics think they can get a better head coach for this team, and I don't see why that wouldn't be the belief based off of 2 of the past 3 years being abject disasters, basically. Especially when you look at it, Sap, that, okay, maybe 2 years ago with Kyrie, you say, okay, well, these are Brad Stevens type of guys. He doesn't, Kyrie, he can't coach stars. Let's get him a team with his type of guys that, blue collar, lunch pail, Grant Williams types. Well, that didn't work either. So,
it's never worked.
What's the formula? He's not the right coach for the team. Get rid of him, eat the contract, or you're being cheap.
No, you're not winning an NBA title with Grant Williams playing 24 minutes a night or Romeo Langford playing 18 minutes a night. Peyton Pritchard, God bless him. I mean, he's a nice player, but he should be a 8th or a 9th guy on your roster. Those are all Brad Stevens guys. Well, great. That maybe works in college basketball, where he was very successful, and he's been successful here. And I get the narrative from Rick Grossbeck, if we let him go, he'll be picked up in 10 seconds. Well, so be it. You may have to make that move. Trade him if you can, right? So that the new team has to eat his contract. I mean, be creative. Just don't say we can't do this because he's got 6 years left on his contract. I mean, we're not running a TV station here where the anchor is signed up for 6 years, and the ratings aren't that bad. You stick with them.
I mean, coaches, it's a retread league, Sap. These guys get fired and picked up all the time. That's not an embarrassment. And I'm sure he'd do well wherever his team is, but they would top out exactly where the Celtics have topped out. He has not shown the ability to win a championship by coaching stars. You need star players to win a championship. He has not been able to show the ability he can do that. So great. He goes to the Pacers, the Sacramento Kings. They're, scrappy. They get to the Eastern Conference Finals. They'll get swept, or they'll go 6 games. And I'm sure that in another market in Indiana, Sacramento, that's fine. That's acceptable. That's, they're thrilled with that sort of finish. But here, that shouldn't be, because of how competitive it is with the other teams in the market, and because they have 17 championships. That's not what people are expecting of your coach, is that, okay, he's going to max out at the conference finals. And so I don't care that he'd be snapped up by another team. That doesn't mean anything to me. Let him be snapped up by another team. Freaking Luke Walton was a terrible coach with the Lakers, and he got snapped up by another team immediately. That's just what the way the league is. That's not an excuse to keep a guy.
Masai Ujiri fired the coach of the year.
Right.
And moved on to Nick Nurse. And in Nick Nurse's first year, they won a championship. He traded maybe the most popular player in Toronto Raptors history, DeMar DeRozan, for Kawhi Leonard, knowing Kawhi Leonard most likely would spend 1 year in Toronto, won a championship. Brilliant. I mean, that's what you do. If you want to be a middling team for a dozen years and it's a nice story and we love the coach and it's a great culture and yada, 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 that's all well and good. It's all about winning titles, especially like you said, they've won 17 of them. And look, the Lakers have won 17. That's got to be a real narrative, right? If you're a Celtic fan or someone that works for the Celtics, you don't want to see the Lakers surpass you. Well, I would think the Lakers are closer to winning number 18 than you are.
Yeah, well, it bothers me, so why shouldn't it bother the owner of the freaking team?
Yeah, because, I mean, he took over, and at that point, the Celtics had a lead in terms of titles. Celtics, since Rick Grossbeck took over, won a title, and the Lakers have won 3, right? They won the 2 with Kobe and Paul Gasol, and then last year with LeBron. because Wick didn't own the team when Kobe and Shaq won 3 straight.
He took
So
over
yeah,
in 02, 03.
02, 03. Yeah. So you're supposed, I think it was around 03. So by then, Kobe and Shaq had won their 3 titles. So you're supposed to be the guardian of this great organization. And under your watch, you've only won 1. Meanwhile, your biggest rival won 3. Now, you can't really have any impact on what the Lakers have done or not done. But that's got to be a real thing, unless it's just a fans thing. I mean, it's.
I've heard him say it though before, Sep. We can't
Right.
allow the Lakers to do this, but well, then do something about it.
Do something, yeah. I mean, you're screwed for the next couple of years because LeBron's there with Anthony Davis, and no matter what you do, as long as those guys are healthy, you're not going to surpass them. I don't think, unless LeBron gets old quickly, which I don't see happening.
I mean, unless they make, a massive move and are able to somehow package a ton of draft picks and Marcus Smart or whatever and get, another really great player in here. I don't know. The James Harden trade was just so bizarre because of how little they had to give up to get him, that I suppose anything is possible. I mean, when you're talking about a top 5 player in the league, a guy who won MVP a couple of years ago and has won 1 billion scoring titles, moving teams with years on his contract left for basically fodder, then I guess anybody could get traded for anything.
I mean, Brooklyn didn't give up anybody as good as Jaylen Brown in that trade.
No.
I mean, everyone was talking about, would you trade Jaylen Brown and other things for James Harden? In retrospect, yeah, I would. I mean, James Harden is that good. And I love Jaylen Brown, but look, James Harden's a top 30 player in the history of the sport. And he makes others around him better. We've seen that in Brooklyn this year with Durant and Kyrie, who have been spotty in and out of the lineup. But maybe you didn't even have to give up Jaylen Brown, but you weren't going to part with Marcus Smart or Robert Williams III or some draft picks that you had built up. I mean,
and Sap, to a lesser
that's
degree,
crazy.
The Drew Holiday trade was similar. They just gave up pick capital. They didn't give up any, really meaningful play.
Nope.
Give freaking Eric Bledsoe.
Right. Yeah, I mean, you could have traded and go back a couple of years. Terry Rozier, maybe you could have moved on from him at the trade deadline that year that he left and went to Charlotte.
That's
maybe
what I'm saying. Asleep at the wheel. It seems like he used to sleep at the Ainge is asleep at the wheel with a lot of these things.
Kind of like Tony La Russa, who's literally been asleep at the wheel.
I don't know what's going on with the. I mean, we're not going to get into the White Sox, but it's like every day there's something weird.
Well,
going
Jerry
on
Reinsdorf. I mean, there's a connection. He owns the Bulls too, so maybe we can bring it into
that.
But yeah,
yesterday they had a player swing on a 3-0 count up 11.
Yep. Yep.
He was not happy about that.
Good for him. I mean, it's baseball. If you want to put a
good for the player,
positional player in, don't these guys in baseball, not to go off on a tangent, but what money they make is tied into their numbers. Baseball's driven by numbers. So what?
Players get so pissed about this stuff, though.
Well, if the kid that hit the home run has 27 home runs instead of 26 at the end of the season, good for him. Like this isn't Little League, but yeah, Tony La Russa is still living in like the 1960s.
Yeah, no, he's whatever. I can't believe he's a manager again. That's the strangest part about all this sort of thing.
Yeah, is Joe Torre coming back? I mean, and Joe Torre.
What would be the NBA equivalent of this?
Larry
Phil Jackson
Brown
coming back? Yeah,
Larry Brown.
Larry Brown, yeah.
Larry Brown would still be a damn good coach. I'd say Larry Brown did a good job at SMU. He's got to be close to 80, Jet. He's got to be. He's close to that.
80 on the dot, Sap.
Yeah, and he still looks 10 years younger. I mean,
I like Larry Brown.
Oh, I love Larry Brown. I mean, he's, he and Mike Lupica look like they're 10, 20 years younger. They kind of look like they could be brothers. Larry Brown's a great coach, won in both college and in the NBA. He did a good job at SMU. And that's not easy coaching in college at 75. No, Larry Brown could re-enter the league, and I think he'd be adaptable. Tony La Russa's like falling asleep in the dugout. He didn't even know the extra innings rules. And he's like saying that it's okay that the other team threw at his own player and, they shouldn't swing at 3-0. That's the unwritten rules. And he's a jackass anyway. I got to meet him years ago. What a pompous ass. I mean, again, he's a lawyer, which, we don't have to go much further than that. I'm not going to disparage all lawyers, but lawyers do think they're the smartest people in the room, and oftentimes they're not.
Yeah. So, maybe we'll see Larry Brown make a return.
Let's push. Maybe he'll come back to the Celtics. Who knows?
Maybe. I actually do know that he's always wanted to coach the Celtics. That has been a dream.
That's about the only team he hasn't. I mean, he's coached like every team.
He's coached. I have it right now. He's coached Denver, The
Yep.
New Jersey, San Antonio, the Clippers, the Pacers, the Sixers, the Pistons, the Knicks, and the Hornets.
9 teams. Yeah, he's coached 9 teams in the NBA. Yeah, and
And
he also
then
coached in the ABA.
he did. He coached Carolina, I think, in the ABA, right? Whatever the hell they
Yep.
were called.
And he was a player. So Larry Brown was a really good
Cougars.
player.
The
Yeah,
Carolina Cougars.
really, really good player as well as a point guard, feisty point guard from New York. And we know the relationship he had with Iverson. I think he was tough on Iverson. And as they grew older, I think they respected each other more, like often is the case. Yeah, no, Larry Brown would be fantastic. I'd love to. I would not be shocked if this is how old Larry Brown is, that, he's Greg Popovich's mentor. And think about that. That's like Bernie Sanders is not the senior senator
Right,
from
he's the
Vermont.
junior.
Yeah, it's Patrick Leahy, who was in Batman, wasn't he?
Yes, he was. He loves Batman. Patrick Leahy calls Bernie Sanders young man.
Young man.
Jeez,
Young
God, the
whippersnapper.
United States Senate is ancient.
Oh, man. Tony La Russa would be young in the U.S. Senate.
Yeah. So, we'll see what happens with the Celtics in terms of this series with the Nets. I'm going to say it'll be a quick 4. I just don't see how they're going to have any sort of chance. But I think that everything we've been saying is the most likely is swept or 5 games at best.
I'd say 5. I think they'll get 1.
They go into the offseason. They don't change Ainge. They don't change Stevens. They make some, roster tinkers. They come back next year. They're probably in a similar spot. They're not going to crack that top 3 in the East with this roster. So the best they could really do is 4.
And let's not forget, Miami, I think, has a better roster.
I agree.
I mean, the Knicks in Atlanta, they kind of both have caught lightning in a bottle.
No, that's why it's frustrating, Sap, because you should be better than those 2 teams. Clearly.
You should be 4 or 5 in that range. So you're not playing Brooklyn in the first round. You're playing one of those teams in the first round. And, maybe you get hot and you win that first round series, get to the second round. Look, when Jaylen Brown got hurt and is out for the year, all bets are off at that point because he's your second best player. So I don't think anybody's expecting anything in this series other than maybe Brian Scalabrine, who I'm sure will pick them to win in 6.
Yeah. All right. So that's going to do it. Next show, we're going to be talking about some comments made by Sap Sky LeBron James. We focused a lot on the Celtics today, so it's only fair that tomorrow we focus on the Lakers and LeBron, who are about to get underway for their play-in game in just a couple of hours here against the Warriors, a game that I'm really excited to watch, actually. That should be a great game. And we're also going to be talking about some of the awards that the players have been bestowing on their own, right? The players make determinations too. These aren't the official league awards, but the players also vote and they have their own separate sort of thing. So we got that on tap for tomorrow. Until then, I'm Jet Stryer. That's John Sapichetti. We are together, the Pick and Roll NBA podcast with Jet and Sap, and we're presented by Full Press Coverage. Make sure you check out our podcasts on their website or wherever other podcasts are found on iTunes. Just download it right to your phone. You can also find us on YouTube at youtube.com/Jet Stryer for the awesome visual presentation. All right. We'll see you tomorrow, everybody.